It's your time to be the guest, Swati, here on the network. You look great. Thanks for showing up. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It is very interesting being in this position. The tables have turned. I'm so used to being the one doing the interviewing, so this is exciting.
I know, right? I mean, you get to talk about yourself. Most people don't struggle talking about themselves. Like,
Fun fact, I do.
you do? Come on, don't do this to me.
Sometimes. No, but I'm going to totally, embrace it. And I'm really looking forward to chatting with you and just getting to know a little bit more about what you're up to as well.
Yeah.
See, that's the interviewer in me.
See, now you're starting with it. Well, okay, it's my turn. Let me take this over. Okay, let me take this over.
Totally.
So, give people some background. We've talked before. We've definitely
Mhm.
talked before offline. So this is kind of our first podcast meeting with it. But I was fascinated to talk to you as you're in the psychedelic community. But I think the angle that is very different for most people in the psychedelic community is overcoming the kind of cultural biases that people like you and me have to overcome when using plant medicine or talking about plant medicine, psychedelics and stuff. So let's start kind of digging into that a little bit, and maybe how for you that has been somewhat difficult to overcome.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, thank you for asking me that because I feel like it's such a personal subject and topic that I don't generally get to share. And I don't think that people are fully aware of and understand. But so, my background and my heritage, I'm Indian. So, my parents are immigrants. They came from Punjab, and I was born in Canada. So, yeah, it's just been a really interesting experience of being first generation Hindu, Punjabi, and coming from a relatively traditional home, to be honest. My parents are, they're very Hindu, they're very Indian, traditional. You're going to marry a nice Indian boy, like that is very them. And so, yeah, of course, you could understand how this part of my life is really not so open with them. And it's something that I have kind of had to struggle with pretty much my entire life. It's obviously psychedelics have been something that have totally, formatively shaped who I am. And I've been using them quite honestly for about maybe 12 or 13 years. So since I was, late adolescent, and that's kind of when I started developing myself spiritually, mentally, emotionally. I've had to kind of overcome a lot, of that kind of cultural conditioning, cultural biases, and everything that has kind of just held me back to becoming who I want to be. And so having to not disclose this part of my life with the people that I care about a lot is challenging. And there's a lot of stigma associated with psychedelics that I don't think that people are even aware of. It's like, I know there's a lot of kind of this general unease, maybe, oh, what's that all about? Obviously all of the conditioning from the 60s. But in Indian culture, it's almost kind of like if you do anything as a woman, there's that like added layer. It's like as a young Indian woman, this is the problem, you're just this menace to society. You're not following that kind of straight-laced, make us proud kind of narrative that I've been conditioned to really believe my whole life, and almost kind of not being able to live up to that. It's very heartbreaking in a way, personally. Although they don't actively make me feel that way, they're very proud of what I do. But to be transparent, they don't know that I work in the psychedelic space.
Do you know that they are going to listen to this? I don't know. I just like,
I
who
have a
knows?
lot of, I know, probably not because they're not really online. They're super traditional. Like I said,
Yeah.
they watch their programs in the evening. They listen to their early morning prayers. Like I just love them so much, but you know what I mean? Like that's kind of their vibe. And so, this space, like working within this space, has been a challenge for me. It's been something that I have had to actually just kind of keep to myself. I've had to basically, the way that I work with this is that I've essentially told them everything honestly, minus the psychedelics part, which is really interesting because they ask me, they're like, okay, so what do you do? It's like, okay, I work in media, I'm going to conferences, I'm interviewing researchers. in mental health, you know, and I have a psychology background. And so for them, it makes sense. They're like, okay, great. You know, you're pursuing this media career. You're in upper management. I was with Psychedelic Spotlight. And so I think they felt good about what I was doing, but they didn't fully understand the parameters and, you know, everything. And so there's no way I could tell them like, I don't know. There's
Why
no like
though?
when the
Like,
time is right.
like why? What do you think they're
You
gonna think?
know, they would be very disappointed because for them, you know, it's such a foreign concept of our daughter is working in this industry with illicit substances. Like, this is the Indian community. You have to remember that they belong to a community of people where your child and what they do is kind of like very, very much so a representation of you and who you are as a parent. And so if you're raising a child who is working in some illicit industry with drugs, like for
Drugs.
them, yeah, for drugs, like that's essentially how they see it, right? They don't fully understand, okay, you know, there's all this mental health research around it. For them, it's an automatic, almost like that's something we could never tell our friends, our family. That would be disappointing. And so that's partially it. And so this kind of weight has been, you know, carried with me for many years, and it will probably continue to be carried with me, unfortunately. But at the same time, I've also accepted it at this point in my life. Like, as you know, a young adult, it's like, yeah, I get it. That's just kind of how they are, and this is just kind of how it is. And this is how I've had to maintain a lot of different components of my life with them. Like, just to mention, another thing that I'm really engaged with is the dance music community and electronic music. I'm also a DJ. And so, and you could imagine, young Indian girl going clubbing at like 18,
Great.
like that's also something that they have very little understanding of. They know that I've done radio and that I had a radio show. They saw my gear in my room. It's like very expensive gear. And they're like, what is that? And I'm like, it's for the radio show, guys. And it is technically.
Let me
Technically
give you
it
some
is.
background. I want to give you some backgrounds. I think this will help this conversation. Like, I am not Indian, but I am very familiar with Indian culture. I'm going to tell you why. I'm
Okay.
going to tell you why.
Yeah,
Because I've
please.
had several Indian clients throughout the years, and one of a set of my clients, they've been with me over a decade. So I've been at their house. I stay at their house all the time. And I had never met any Indian people like and talked to them specifically in depth before this, like, well, a decade ago. So I got like everything. I got like all of it. But what I think is really cool is they're very progressive,
Yeah.
older Indian people. So like they're not like the traditional Indian folks. They're like the opposite, which I thought was really interesting. But when I would meet their
Mm.
friends, they were completely traditional Indian folks. And I saw was like when you're saying this, I'm like, I totally get it. I
You could
understand.
see it.
Right. You know, like I just
Yeah.
had a lady on last night. She's from Pakistan, and very similar, right? Traditional Pakistani parents, whole thing. She has purple hair. Like she is. But this is a
Wow.
change with, I think, people from that part of the world. The young people are starting to move away from the old ways, and you're seeing a change of
Yes.
the guard. So that's my background with it. So I understand what you're saying with that.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that because, yeah, I think it's difficult for people to wrap their head around that. They're like, but you're a fully grown woman. Like, you're an
Right.
adult. Why does this even matter to you? And family honor is just something that is so ingrained into you when you're from a collectivist culture like Indian heritage, or if you're, you know, Chinese or whatever it is, really, so much of what you do as an individual is reflected on the family. And it's like this honorary kind of like embedded system that just kind of seems to exist. There's this idea of, you know, I have an obligation to make sure that I'll be there for my family, you know, long term. And even if I live on my own, even you know, as a young Indian woman living on your own, that's even something that is a problem for them. Like
No.
at an early age, at 18, when I went away for university, they were like, oh my God, like, I can't believe you're leaving the house, you know, I'm just so worried. And so it's interesting because, yeah, it's just this like universal thing, I think, depending on, you know, how traditional on the scale of traditionality, you know, where are you at? if you're, you know, deep in it, then that's very common actually with Indian parents. And it's common to live with your parents actually into your
Yes, it
30s,
is.
like well into your
Yeah.
30s. And so, and people are like, that's wild. And I'm like, you know, it is what
And
it
the
is.
mothers and the sons are really tight. Generally,
Yeah,
that's
they
like a
can
big
be.
thing. It's like a really big
Yeah.
thing. I was like, wow,
Yeah.
that's a little much.
It's because the sons are like, you know, it's my son, you know, he's gonna bring honor to the family
Yeah.
and, you know, get a great wife and I don't know,
Yeah.
dowries and stuff. Like I don't
Yeah. So I
know.
mean, it's great. Oh, it's just such a very interesting culture, but it's, I think, like I was talking to this other guest the other day, is this cultural conformity and this idea of like when you have these homogenous cultures, generally speaking, there's an idea that you must fit within this box. Like, I don't feel like what I'm about to say is like new to anybody that knows this, but like often there's a job pathway too in these cultures. Like you're going to be an engineer, doctor, lawyer, and you know, and it's there's very money centered, but also don't spend a lot of money either. Is that a thing? So it's an interesting pathway to be in. And then I see like a lot of younger people bucking this. But then when you add the psychedelics to it, it's like, whoa, whoa,
It's next level.
right? You're going to ruin your life, is what they're thinking. It's nothing like that, though.
It's nothing like that. Yeah, exactly. And I wonder if the psychedelic movement will get to a place 10 years, maybe 15, 20 years down the road where it's so commonplace that it's like 1 in 5 people are doing psychedelic therapy rather than traditional therapy. Microdosing is like the norm. I mean, it feels like the norm to me, to be honest, because I operate in this space. I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah.
oh, you don't microdose? No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, it just feels like maybe at that point when it's so second nature, okay, we can kind of accept this. But because it's so emerging, there's still so many regulations that are against it. There's only a handful of states that have kind of allowed this to happen. You know, under obviously medical
Yeah.
supervision. And that's something that I'm just curious about to see, you know.
Yeah. You know what? I want to move into that, but I also want to go back a little bit. What's curious to me about Indian culture, which I know is a very spiritual culture with, different sects of religion, that you wouldn't embrace psychedelics because it's a very much an spiritual experience. What is
I
that?
know.
That's what seems weird to me with it.
Totally. Yeah. And that is a bit strange, right? Because Hinduism is this like deeply spiritual practice. We have yoga in the West. Everybody's doing yoga. You know, everyone's mom's doing yoga. It's just
Yeah.
this thing. And it's interesting to think about that. And I just think that there is a division and understanding of what is appropriate versus what is like not, you know. And I
Yeah.
just think that surprisingly, psychedelics are not that common in India. You know, there's a substance called soma, which is a psychedelic drink that potentially has, you know, emerged in ancient India and provided some type of psychedelic healing, but you know, it's different to kind of Central America, South America, where I'm at right now. I'm in Mexico City. And obviously there's like Mazatec culture. They are just very deeply into the world of psilocybin and whatnot. So I just feel like the cultural differences have allowed it to, you know, not really spread compared to somewhere like here where it went to the West after.
Yeah. It's I just find it fascinating. If it's a very spiritual based culture, it would seem to align very closely with psychedelics, which has an incredible spiritual element to it. But I digress. But I wonder where we're headed with psychedelics. And as you know, I interview tons of people in this space. I'm very curious about it. But is this something we're going to see more widespread through the medical intervention aspect of it first, and then maybe for the well-being of well people aspect of it
Mhm.
after that?
I think that both are happening simultaneously right now, actually. I feel like the medical model is a little bit slower to develop for obvious reasons because of regulation. But the well-being centered narrative is spreading very fast. And obviously microdosing is really taking the forefront of that. It's the most accessible way for people to approach psychedelics. They're not overwhelmed by it. It's something that they can contain. They're feeling good for the most part initially, or however they're, using their protocol. And I see it as the gateway into more advanced, I don't know how you want to phrase that, forms of psychedelic healing, which could lead to the therapeutic route. But I don't see the opposite happening as frequently. It's exciting to see. Regardless, psychedelics are everywhere. Every major news platform is reporting on it. And that's a huge, huge shift. I was just looking at a graph that was showing the trends over the past 5 years. And it was in 2022 that it reached its peak in terms of online Google searches and coverage in that sense. And that's amazing.
What's been the tipping point you think that has caused this to become more widespread and like information, media, all of that?
Yeah, there's a number of factors. I believe that a really big portion of it was the FDA essentially saying that MDMA was considered a breakthrough therapy for PTSD. This was in 2019 or so. Once that happened, people were like, wow, this is exciting. This is huge news. And this almost kind of legitimizes all of the research that different institutions such as MAPS have done in the past. And so from there, things really started snowballing. Obviously, during that time, Michael Pollan's book came out, How to Change Your Mind. I'm sure you've heard of it.
Yes.
And if you haven't, check it out.
I've read it and listened to it.
It's fantastic. Yeah, it's a good gateway drug, quote unquote, but it really introduces you to that world. And so this really kind of brought up a lot of interest and an additional stir of more research on top of that into 2020. And that was kind of when the pandemic hit as well. People are locked inside their homes and they're challenged with mental health issues. And they're wondering, how can I overcome this right now when, I'm, trapped in my home and I'm just with my thoughts all day. So I think it almost accelerated this movement forward. I would say that from there, it just continued building traction. And now it's really exciting news. And so these mainstream outlets are like, ooh, let's talk about that. Like, how wild is it that, there's all this research coming out. There's all these people that are allowed to legally use psilocybin for, palliative care or whatever it is that they're, needing to use them for. So it's very cool. It's a snowball effect for sure.
Yeah. I mean, the research was extremely robust in the 60s back then. I mean, it was awesome. And, it changed on a dime, and it's really sad, but I'm happy that maybe it's better that it's having a resurgence now. It just maybe everything they has its time, and you think, well, maybe the world would be better if it was continuing during that time, but I don't know. You never know. No, but I'm glad that it is happening. But I'm curious, you haven't told your parents, but I'm sure you've told other people. Have you ever run into anybody who had resistance to what you've said to them about your psychedelic use?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, actually, I have. I have experienced that in my own inner circle of friends that are kind of those like lifelong best friends that don't actually use psychedelics. They're more into drinking. They're not really about exploring the mind and thinking philosophically. It's more like turning up at the bar, and so love these people dearly. But you can only imagine me 4 or 5 years ago talking about all this research coming out and being super excited about everything, and they're just kind of like, okay, what's this all about? Like, is this safe? What is that? Like, that is insane, and it felt a little bit alienating, I guess, but I'm super grateful that I was able to find community in other places that also shared the same sentiment. But it was very enlightening for me to realize, okay, I don't think everybody is on board with this. There's a lot of questioning of, is this safe? Like, why would you be using ketamine? I heard that's not good for you. It's bad for your bladder or whatever it is. But it's come a long way now. And a couple of them are microdosing now. So it's a good thing. Yeah.
What was the biggest maybe misperception of psychedelics from people you talk to?
The biggest misperception, it's probably the level of danger, the fact that there might be like psychological, physical harm. Are you actually able to do this frequently or, on a regular basis without harming yourselves? And obviously, as most of us in this space know, that the research shows, it is safe. Relatively speaking, obviously take precautions, make sure that you have a sitter, you're not doing, ketamine recreationally every night or whatever it is, because that could be bad for you and addictive and whatnot. So yeah, there are components that people should consider, and harm reduction is key here. But ultimately, very rarely do you hear people saying, he was addicted to mushrooms and he like
No,
OD'd on
no,
mushrooms. Like
no,
you would
not a
probably
chance.
not. Yeah, very rarely does
No.
that ever happen, if ever, And so, yeah, good to know.
You know what's interesting? I find this like with psychedelics and my trips and experiences, it feels like it lessens your desire to want to be in drinking culture. Like when I mean drinking culture, I mean binge drinking culture. And like because it's like it feels not significant to you. It's like, I just had this crazy adventure and then I had this other thing that made me feel sick. It's like there's something, it almost disconnects you from it on some level. I don't know. I'm interested what you think about that.
Oh, I'm glad that you said that. I totally agree with that. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term California sober,
I am.
but this
Yeah.
is yeah, it's a funny term because it's like, oh, no drinks for me, thanks. But if you have some ketamine or MDMA or whatever it is, they're willing to use psychedelics rather than drink because psychedelics don't necessarily make you inebriated, disoriented, almost detached from who you are. It kind of does the opposite, where you're able to more consciously take in your environment, your surroundings. I know everybody, individual dose varies so much from person to person, and obviously take precautions if you're taking these in public. Be careful, like please, or whatever it is, really. But even if you're just using them at home or if you're doing it therapeutically, you will probably not want to pick up a drink and get sloshed the next
No.
weekend because it feels physically, psychologically, mentally, emotionally bad at that point.
Yeah.
You've seen the other side. You're more conscious and aware of what you should be doing for your health, your body, your life. And I love that so much about them, actually. So like my favorite thing is to more so kind of like stay in the realm of a microdose if I'm going out, and it just makes me feel good and chill and relaxed. And yeah, I don't know, it's great.
I think so too. It's funny, like I enjoy making cocktails. I like a good cocktail with dinner and stuff, but like
Totally.
it's really pretty much that's the extent of it. And I was telling my wife, I was like, man, I haven't been drunk in like a really long time, like crazy, but I've definitely been high. And like I've done, I've definitely been in a different plane, with psychedelics. And it just, to me, it's just preferable. I feel better. I have extremely profound experiences, the closeness, the tightness with myself and other people. And my friends are all the same way. I introduced all my friends to psychedelics, that really tight.
Wow.
And we've all done the same thing. We've gone the other direction and lessened the other for that. And
Amazing.
it's funny when you start doing that, other people don't understand that because they're used to like binge drinking culture. And it's like where you have a good time for a little bit, but you pay on the back end really bad. It's like really bad. So
Totally. Totally.
it's like this doesn't
Yeah.
make sense to me, you know?
Absolutely. And that's an amazing story, to be honest. The fact that you were able to kind of spread that influence, that I would say relatively positive influence,
Yeah.
into your own inner circles rather than it being the other way around and having to kind of move on from certain groups. Because I know that can happen as well.
Yeah,
That's quite
sure.
common, I feel, in this world. And I'm very blessed and lucky to have friends that have consciously used psychedelics for a long time, similar to myself. And we are all pretty spiritually aligned and we've developed ourselves over the years. And so that's very positive. But, that drinking culture is just rampant. It's such a
Yeah,
norm.
That's
It's difficult to escape sometimes, but I think things are changing now. I'm seeing more seltzers,
I'm
more
seeing more
seltzers at the bar.
seltzers.
Yeah, I love
Yeah,
that. I love
I'm all
seltzer.
about it. I enjoy having a cocktail with somebody, and so that's still something I really enjoy. I just not interested in feeling like crap. Like,
Right.
it's like, but I'm more interested in having profound experiences that I feel like I'm becoming more enlightened, and these substances do that. And
Totally.
so I think that's kind of the turning point with that. But it's interesting. Like I told my parents, so I have a leg up on you, Swati. Okay.
I'm so happy for you, Darren. That's
And
great.
they were, I think they're a little skeptical, but they got over it. They were like, oh, okay. But my brother and I both do it. And I think they're curious. They're more curious. They've reached curious stage now because they were socialized into this is bad. And of course, it's a
Mhm.
Schedule One ridiculous drug. It's crazy. It's
Yeah.
literally crazy. It's
In the
like
US, it's like insane. I'm from
insane.
Canada, so it's a little different, but it's just
Okay.
like absolutely insane. I
Yeah.
agree.
It makes no sense. But that's what people see and they associate bad, bad, bad with that.
Always. Yeah, absolutely. Or at least, our parents' generation or whatever it is. But I'm glad that you were able to kind of like have them warm up to you in that way and just
Yeah.
like kind of acclimate to your lifestyle because maybe they were seeing, oh, he's a lot happier. He's feeling good. He's not out drinking on the weekends all the time or whatever it is, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think it's just open-mindedness is really important. And I also think it's important for everybody listening out there, it's important if you're someone like you see someone who has their life together and they're doing these substances, it makes you think, okay, this isn't the stereotype that they're putting out, like some guy in an alley, throwing his life away and he's just jumping out of windows. Like, that's a lie. That's pretty much a lie. But if you see like very reputable people consuming these and having profound experience, it creates a shift, I feel like. And they go, okay, well, if that person thinks it's good, maybe I'm wrong about this.
Definitely. Are you familiar with Dr. Carl Hart?
I am. I am. I've read his
Yeah.
book too.
Love his work. And I think he's a great example of this, somebody who has accomplished so much in his career. He's done incredible research around this subject. And honestly, he's still stigmatized quite a lot because he recreationally uses heroin.
Yeah.
And that's something that he says this is kind of my choice. Here's the research. I'm laying this out for you guys. And so it's almost like this similarity between the classic psychedelics that we're using, like LSD and ketamine, and comparing that to heroin. And almost in a way, it's like this similar feeling of stigma. And I try to relate and understand how are people actually viewing what I'm doing, and it could be they're seeing it as extreme when these things exist on various different kind of continuums. They're very, very different in their effects and what they can do, and it really depends on dosage and environment, very, very much so.
So would you say like, so what's your primary practice? Is it psilocybin, ketamine? What are you doing?
Yeah, I'm a big psilocybin fan.
Me too.
I love the mushroom. Mushies are medicine. That is my saying. It's very liberating to say this, by the way. I feel
I
like
know, isn't it?
it feels amazing. I have to say, like because I've worked in the industry for so long that I felt as though I have had to kind of keep my own personal use to myself, but this feels like a
Yeah.
very safe space to share
Oh
this.
yeah.
And I'm also kind of going solo as well. So it's a little more okay for me to do that. So yeah, mushrooms, love mushrooms, and really appreciate microdosing. Obviously, the odd kind of like full dose, which I would say maybe like 3.5 grams every 3 months or so, 3 to 6
Really?
months even. Yeah, totally.
Oh,
I used to be a lot more adamant, and more regular with it, to be completely
are
honest. It
you
was almost like monthly.
serious?
Yeah, it was like monthly.
Holy shit.
But this was during the pandemic.
Hold
This
on.
is
This was during the pandemic. Don't judge me. Like,
I'm like, I'm not even kidding. Like
Swati,
it
this is
was a time of
incredible.
deep work. It was a time of deep work, you know, like it was a time of really going inward and working through the things that I have just been sitting on that have just started to emerge. And it was really eye-opening. I did ayahuasca during that time for the first time. I did psilocybin ceremonies with my friends. It
Yeah.
was like, you know, very illicit because we weren't allowed to see people. But, you know, it was something that we all felt the need to do during that really dark
Yeah.
time. And I remember that time and how much came from that. And to be honest, I really have scaled back a lot on my psychedelic use since then. So, like I said, yeah, I love psilocybin, big fan. But in this past year, I've only taken smaller doses. I did a 5-MeO retreat last
Are
year,
you
actually.
serious? That's
Yes, I
awesome.
did. It was cool. Yeah, I was invited by Tendava Retreats. Joelle and Victoria are awesome practitioners. They're really, really skilled in this area. So I came over via Spotlight to do some coverage. And I did the experience, and we actually had it on tape. So if you want to check it out, it's at Psychedelic Spotlight's YouTube. And since then, honestly, I scaled back a lot. It was a big experience. It was a very big experience. And I felt the need I felt like a lot of what I got from that and the message that I received was you need to scale back a little and take time to really integrate everything that you have learned. And even though you think you're integrating, you know, like you need some time for that. Like you really do.
This is the best story. It's like,
Is it? Oh,
this
God.
is the honest. This is like raw. This is real. You know, it's like real. Like I'm like literally like every month. I'm like, dude, when I do a big trip, I need like 8 months to like process.
Yeah.
I like literally like it's like a 10-hour trip. And I get done, I'm like, I can't do this again for maybe a year. Like I have to think
Wow.
about this
Yeah.
for like a while.
Totally fair. Totally fair. I mean, like I said, it was a dark time.
It's a dark time.
We were all working through stuff, but hey, came out the other side super strong. Did this 5 retreat and really scaled back, did some microdosing, a couple of other things here and there. But yeah, I'm in a place now where I feel really good. Chicongo is very popular in Mexico. It's mushroom chocolate. And
Nice.
yeah, I'm not really rushing or running towards anything at this moment. I do feel like I'm doing my own personal therapy work, just journaling, therapeutic reflection, and things like along those lines. But yeah, nothing big for me on the horizon right now. So hey, that was the message, you know?
Yeah, that's intense. Honestly,
Is it?
that frequency is intense.
Is
Like
it?
that feels intense to me. I
It
mean,
was intense. Yeah,
yeah,
it
I feel
was.
like going under that many times. I mean, my last trip was this summer, and with
Okay.
a bunch of my buddies, it was extremely profound. But like, I definitely made an ass of myself in the front of my house. There's no doubt about it. Like, I was the loudest human that has ever existed. I couldn't stop laughing, and then it just got
Yeah.
really serious after that.
But isn't it so liberating? You're just
Oh,
like, yeah, and then it gets serious, and then you're like in your feelings, and all the
yeah.
weird things
Oh, I was in
happen.
my
Yeah.
feelings. I mean, I was literally in my living room and I had set it up. See, this is why I think we have to talk about this stuff. Like, I don't care.
Yes.
I just say, I feel like, you know what? If you want to know about it, you're going to hear the crazy stuff, you know. I'm in my living room with these other two guys, my best friends, and I set it up. I mean, I have like techno music playing, I got it like surround sound, and then we're watching like these beautiful landscapes and people are crying and I'm feeling it, man. I'm just like, it's so deep, I'm like, this is the magic, and stuff. And, we're consoling each other. And it's like, that's what I want. I want to be deep with another human. And sometimes you need assistance for that. You need something that will help break down the wall for that level of feeling.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah. It sounds like you were in a really good, safe space to be able
Oh,
to
yeah. I'm
experience
all about
that.
that.
So,
Yeah.
of course, you have to, right? And like
Yeah.
I said, during that time, this was when I really formed like a closeness with my group of friends, with myself, with the medicine, quote unquote, like mushrooms or whatever it is that you
Mushy
choose to
mushroom.
use. Yes. It was just very, it was a very kind of like intentional use for mushrooms. It was very, I don't know, I guess it was a very spiritual time, very spiritual
Yes.
experience when you have to just dig super deep into yourself. And I think I'm not advocating for this at all. Like, I don't recommend
Sure.
anybody go out there. And this is not by any means like a proper dosing schedule or whatever it is.
No.
It's just tailored to me at the time. And like I said, since then, I haven't really had to explore this in that depth anymore. And I have a lot of lessons, a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, especially working in the space from all of this. And I'll continue to carry that until, the next time I feel
Yeah.
called to do it again.
Yeah. What was the 5-MeO experience like? Because I talked to B Chan, and that was
Okay.
her first experience ever with psychedelics, was 5-MeO. And
That's
she
a
said
big
it dropped
experience.
her. She said she was in a circle and that she saw someone do it and they dropped. And then she was
Yep.
like, oh shit, like this is crazy. Like, I was like, so what was your experience like?
That's very interesting. Yeah, as a first experience, I don't know if I would recommend that to
Yeah, I
most
don't know about
people.
that either. It's like,
It's a huge experience, and if you feel called to this, and this is something that, you're up at night thinking, okay, this is what I need, and you've never done any psychedelics, maybe that's something that you need, and that's something to explore. But for me, I was offered the opportunity to try five, like I mentioned. And so I was very skeptical at first. I was a little bit hesitant, to be completely honest. I didn't really know if this was a medicine, quote unquote, that I wanted to explore, that I felt ready to. I have friends that have used 5-MeO quite often, maybe,
wow.
in a spiritual context. And I just didn't really know how I felt about it. I had tried NNDMT before, a couple of times, which was a very kind of strange experience. But yes, the five, it was like the ultimate, it was like the ultimate, I don't even know, like ego death, spiritual experience. I was very lucky to have a very safe container for myself before and after. With Joelle and Victoria, like what they did was they really kind of prepped me, answered all my questions. They also shared a lot of yogic philosophy with me. So if you're interested in that type of thing, you're wondering about, the nature of reality, consciousness, even death, afterlife, if these are things that you're curious about and you have some contextual understanding, this could be something to explore for you. And so that helped me a lot. And then during the experience, it was just like, you have this giant pipe thing. I forget what it was called, but it's just like this very special pipe that is made for 5.
Yeah.
And you only need one hit from it, and they're holding it up to you, and you lose all sense of control in your body. So I understand
Yeah.
what Bia was saying when she saw somebody drop, because that's essentially what had happened to me. But I was thankfully in a very comfortable space, and I was lying down, as you should, I would say.
Yeah, I would say, yeah.
I would say probably don't stand up, because I've seen practitioners serve that medicine, and that way, I don't know how I feel about that. But yes, really just gone, like blasted into outer space. It's all in your mind. It's all very fast, very intense. And you no longer have an egoic identity. You have
Yeah.
no, inner narrative anymore. All you're doing is just experiencing what is in front of you. You have no way to escape, so you might as well just embrace. And all you're doing is just taking in this like explosion of like light, and it feels like you're physically on a rocket. Like that's
Yeah.
literally how I felt.
Yeah.
And it was unbelievable. There's no real words to describe what had happened, and I can't even imagine it anymore. But then coming out of it, you start to have your ego, quote unquote, coming into your mind narrative, and start to try to make sense of what had happened. But then also you're still feeling the residual effects of that medicine. And so, all of these questions are coming, and you're starting to think deeply about yourself. And it was very emotional. It was a very emotional experience. I just cried actually immediately after, just like sobbing, because I was
Wow.
like overwhelmed.
Wow. That's amazing. See, I
Yeah.
think more people should share these stories Like I talk to a lot of people in psychedelics, they don't share the stories enough. I think I
I
want to hear the
totally agree.
stories. Like, or there's like
I
this,
know.
like you said, oh, this is very freeing talking about. I'm like, yes, we should be talking about this. Like, it's not this ethereal thing. It's like, well, I'm in the psychedelic space and I talk about it and I kind of just don't let you into what actually happens, but we're talking about it. It's like,
Yeah, yeah.
no, let people in. People need to know what is happening. It's like,
This sounds like a great angle for you, to be honest. Like, I think that this is an awesome opportunity for you to be able to kind of bring that from people. Because for me, obviously it's tough for me to put myself out there and talk about my experiences, but I feel very grateful to hear other people's trip experiences. And those are generally the content creators or whoever it is, those figures that receive the most interest, because it's so important for people to understand and make sense of like, what is this? And this is also something I've talked about before. Like, using psychedelics is so incredibly spiritual. Like, some people are not ready for that level
yeah,
of information and personal understanding. There's just that narrative that you're hearing. I work in the industry, these things have changed my life, but how and why and what happened and what did you think about, what did you see, how did you feel after? Were there any residual effects of the medicine after, like, were
yeah.
you experiencing side effects, like things like that? I think super, super important for people to talk about. So thank you so much for letting me do that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. For me, it's just like I'm not even in this industry. I'm just talking to people who are in it and stuff. I'm in the fitness industry. I have nothing to do with psychedelics, but the experiences I've had have been so overwhelming that I feel like I want to interview the people who are in it, and I want to like bring it more to light. Because I think it's transformational, not just for me or you, but for society as a whole. And I think we just have to talk about it. Like we can't sugarcoat it. I know for me it changed my idea of nature. Like I didn't care about nature before psychedelics. Zero caring about nature.
Wow, you didn't
Zero
care about nature.
at all. But this is the honest thing. We gotta be honest, right?
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah. Thank you
bad
for being
stuff that you
honest.
think about, the good stuff, you should be honest, thoughtfully honest. It's
Of
like,
course.
yeah, people, oh man, terrible. You didn't like nature. That's just how I felt at the time,
No, I was just curious. I was
right?
like, wait, you didn't like
Zero.
nature?
I wasn't connected to it. It was like,
Wow, very interesting.
whatever, like
Very
whatever.
interesting.
After my first experience, I was deeply connected to nature, everything. And it changed how I wanted to live in nature, where I wanted to live physically, everything. It made me closer to my wife because she's super nature oriented. And I was like, wow, I needed to do this. Like this changed everything. So I think people need to hear that type of stuff. Like it's not like, oh, I had a good time. No, I had a good time, but also it changed me dramatically in my thought process. That's what people need to hear too. Like it confirmed spirituality. I've always been a spiritual person. I've always had a great experience with spirituality, religion. It made it better. It actually made it better
Wow.
for me. Like that's the stuff people need to talk about. like.
That's amazing. And I think that's a great way for you to also kind of like reflect what's happening culturally in general. Just people who are spiritual in different ways. They take care of themselves. They believe in fitness and wellness.
Yeah.
And then there's this other thing that comes out of nowhere, and it's a tool that just unlocks this whole other dimension of potential that exists within you.
Yeah.
And it's just fascinating stuff, to see what people are able to either change or build on from there, and maybe change the trajectory of their lives. Like, I'm not sure if 5 years ago you would have thought you'd
No.
be doing this conversation right now, and
No.
so it's incredible to see how things can dramatically change because of entheogens, plant medicine, psychedelics, hallucinogens, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah. I actually think it's my responsibility to talk about it and be responsible. Like, listen, as Michael Pollan said, this isn't for everyone. And it actually may be better to do. This is what he said, about maybe do it later in life. I mean, you did it early, you did it, whatever. It's all good, but like it's interesting. Like I'm definitely doing it every decade of my life because I think it'll be meaningful as I continue to get older for that. But I think, you know, it's responsibility of well people, I think, to put out there that they're doing this stuff. I'm not going to hide it. I honestly don't care what people think about it. I just think it's literally life changing. And when you speak
Yeah.
passionately about something that has a positive effect, that generally is extremely safe, barring things like schizophrenia and all these things. There's obviously things that go along with it, but overall, it's one of the safer things you could do. It really is. I mean, people are drinking constantly. Like, alcohol is way worse for you, like way worse. But we've been socialized to do it constantly. So I just think, like, I'm in fitness, and I've had a great career in fitness. I don't feel like, oh, this is going to mess up my career. I feel like it's important for me to talk about it in my career. It's like, I go to a conference and speak. I have no problem if somebody asks me about it. I'd be like, yeah, let's talk about it. You want to hear my story? I'll tell you every detail of the trips I've done. And I'm still here speaking. I'm like, I'm not a degenerate. Like,
Love that. Yeah, no, it's great. I think it's awesome that you can be that person for your industry as well, and like spread that message to people
yeah,
who have probably never considered it, because like for
yeah,
me, I'm just operating in the same circles with like-minded people that are really deep in this, to be honest. But
yes,
then outside of that is what people need to understand and hear, and hopefully unlock something within themselves. But no rush, right? It all comes in due
yeah.
time.
Speaking of that, when are you going to tell your parents, Swati? This is the one. This is, I'm not letting this go.
Oh my gosh, I'm so peer pressured now. This is so funny. When maybe if I make it to like daytime TV or something, we'll
Oh,
see.
okay. You okay? Wait. You have to be like really successful. Like,
That's what I'm saying.
they were like, it's okay now. You've reached this level.
I wish I was joking, but I'm super not. Like that
I
is
love
kind of
that.
unfortunately what it has to be. It's like once you have secured the bag with psychedelics,
Once you got
then
the
you
bag,
can yeah,
not
then you
even
can go
that.
tell your
That's
parents.
honesty. That's
It's
honest
true.
without destroying something. Like, that's honest. Like, there's a
Yeah,
tipping point when you're honest and it destroys things. That's stupid. Like,
exactly.
but this is like, you're being real about it, but you're like, well, this is how it is. Like.
Yeah, unfortunately. I mean, it might not make sense to some people. Some people might be like, I mean, I've received that so much. How on earth are you just like hiding this part of yourself from your parents? And I'm like, well, I'm not Canadian, unfortunately. Well, I am, technically I'm born
Yeah.
in Canada, but I don't, have Canadian parents. And it just completely shifts the narrative, shifts everything for you. It's important to talk about.
I mean, you should be ready to come back on my show when I send the VHS to your parents.
Yeah, they still have
I'm sure they have
a
it.
VCR. Is
Yeah,
that
of
what they're
course.
called? Oh my
Yeah, I'm
God,
sure
I
they have
almost
it. They'd be
forgot.
like, "Pop, put it on." Swati just telling everything. I'd be like, "Yeah, so let's talk about this. What's the reaction?"
Hilarious.
I'm
That
just
is so
joking. Clearly, I'm
funny.
joking for you. But man, this
That's
is
funny.
I love this. I love these conversations. They're always meaningful, and they're even more meaningful when two people who are from I was underrepresented populations in general, but also in the space are talking about it. It gives a lot of other people a greater depth to the to talking about psychedelics and plant medicine. It's really special to have that. So
Totally. I really appreciate you letting me do that and just kind of air out some dirty laundry.
you aired it out. We're gonna keep it too. Don't go back on this. Like,
But it's also it feels great, and I will treasure that, and I hope that it actually does help somebody out there who is curious about this or doesn't feel seen. That's a huge thing, in
yeah,
first generation communities. It's like, am I the only person going through this? Am I the only person who is an oddball or outcast who can't, talk to my mom about this? And I think it's a lot more common than we think, and you just need some people representing people that look like you and that have similar
exactly.
experiences. And this is why it's so important to have diverse, representation, especially in a space like psychedelics,
Yes,
which is the least diverse space I've honestly probably ever
that's
seen.
crazy, right? How
It's
crazy is that?
crazy. It's a little bit upsetting, and it's tough sometimes for myself. It's like Okay, I feel like I'm very visible here in a good way and a bad way, you know, whatever it is. There's a lot of responsibility on my shoulders sometimes, I feel. And I do think it is important that we share this part of things too, this more candid, honest, raw, real, ugly, funny, awkward, like whatever it is. It feels important, I think.
It does feel important. Well, you're part of that important talk. You know, us who doing this is really critical. So let's tell all the people how they can connect with you. And we won't tell your parents clearly, but you know, let everybody know how they
Yeah,
can connect with
sure.
Swati. Yeah.
You can find me on LinkedIn under Swati Sharma IRL. And you can find me on Twitter as well, Swati. And then I believe it's like 7 underscores.
7 underscore.
We'll
A
have it
lot,
in the
actually.
show notes. We'll have
It
it in
is in
the
the
show
show notes.
notes.
I thought it was fake, actually. I was like, what is this? So I was like
No, we will. We will have it in the show notes, so it'll be easier for you guys. But yeah, those are probably the best platforms for now.
fantastic. Swati, thank you for giving me some of your valuable time. I really appreciate it.
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Darian. Have a good one.
Thank you.